Welcome back to Those Happy Places, the podcast that treats theme parks, rides, and attractions like literature. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And Alice, guess what?
What?
We have a big announcement to make.
That's right. We have a huge announcement to make. For everyone listening, we just launched our Patreon.
Boo-boo-boo, Patreon time. Now, we don't want to take up too much of your time at the beginning of the episode. We want to jump right back in. But if you stick around at the end of the episode, we're going to talk a little bit about, what we're offering as far as a Patreon reward tiers. But if you're interested, you can find us at patreon.com/thosehappyplaces. Right, Alice?
Yes, that's right. Patreon.com/thosehappyplaces. But we'll tell you more at the end of this episode. Thank you so much to everyone who to listen and support. We love and appreciate you, regardless of monetary support. We're just happy you're here.
Yeah. So, Alice, I'm really excited about today's episode because this is a concept that's been bopping around in my head for a couple of months now. And it's this idea of theme parks and permanence. Now, we put this out on Twitter. We had a couple of episode ideas, and this is the one that won the poll. So here we are now to talk about it. And I guess I should start with why we're talking about it in the first place, right?
Right. That's right. Because when you brought it up or when you put it in the poll, I hadn't really considered this topic at all. And I didn't have any strong opinions one way or the other on it. So and many of our listeners might not have considered this idea at all. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about what you mean when you say theme park and permanence, and why we're going to talk about it. Why now? Like why today?
Why now, indeed. Well, I guess I was a little inspired by some of the recent news coming out of specifically the Walt Disney Company, which is, all about the stuff that's coming to the parks, all the new stuff that's coming to the parks. And there was this rather controversial statement by the president of the company, Bob Iger, who he said that, they want to focus more on intellectual property and less on generically themed coasters. And many people took that as a dig on Expedition Everest, which, Alice, I know you rode last time you went there.
It's a really good roller coaster.
I would not call this coaster generically themed, but I kind of see, where some of the anger is coming from, but also kind of what the idea of Mr. Iger's whole philosophy here is, which is that people want very thoroughly themed experiences, and many people want these things from properties they recognize. So I completely understand both sides of this argument, but I was thinking about why so many people get really upset when theme parks change, and maybe where that reaction comes from, right? Because theme parks are by nature kind of novelties, and they kind of trade on novelty. So they have this air of being constantly new, constantly refreshed and refurbished, adding new and exciting things. But at the same time, there's this idea that theme parks should maintain an identity, sort of over time, maintain some common core, some theme. Especially with the Disney parks. There's a lot of emotions caught up in that, right?
Right. It's an incredibly emotional space and a very personal space for a lot of people, especially people who maybe have to travel long distances to get there or don't get to experience it all the time. It becomes this really kind of personal place for so many people. And so the idea of it changing or a favorite attraction being taken away, it kind of affects people really personally.
Yeah, and the comparison to other media for me is really interesting. I mean, we always go back to movies. It feels like we're always talking about movies on this theme park podcast. But in the case of film, when a bad movie comes out, especially when it's in something like a beloved franchise, which I think is maybe the nearest comparison we have to theme parks, like something that's ongoing and that should have a core identity that unites every piece of it, right?
Right.
when a bad movie comes out in a franchise that you really like, a common refrain that I often hear is it doesn't invalidate the old stuff. It doesn't make the old stuff go away. And I really agree with that, actually. Alice, you and I were talking about this on our Discord channel before we started this recording. We were talking with fellow Podnaut TH Ponders and a friend of the podcast, Liam. And we were talking, and I was talking about how when I was maybe a teenager and maybe into my early 20s, I really, really hated on the Star Wars prequels all the time.
Oh,
right?
All the time. You hated those movies.
I was insufferable about it. And I do apologize for that past behavior because, in recent years, I've really warmed up to the prequels. The funniest thing was that I used to say, like, oh, my childhood, the prequels, when literally the prequels were my childhood.
Yeah, we were very young when when Phantom Menace came out. And so I always, and I'm going to go ahead and say a little bit of I told you so, because I feel like I spent a lot of time during our teenage years trying to tell you, hey, just because you don't like a current film, just because you don't like this reboot, it came up a lot in songs. It's like, just because you don't like this cover song does not take away your enjoyment of the original song.
Oh yeah.
Like you used to get really up in arms about cover songs too. You were always growing up. You were like an original is always better kind of guy. And I've been guilty of it in the past too, but I think it's part of maturity or just being exposed to more media. But I like to like things, and I think you do too. Part of the fun is surrounding yourself with media and with things that you enjoy, that you like. So if you don't like it, just ignore it, right? Go back to the things that you do like. So even if you still didn't like the Star Wars prequels, no one was ever stopping you from going back to watch the originals.
Right. And the original trilogy and their identity and their aesthetic and all of the things about them that people have always loved still absolutely have always existed. Now that the water is a little muddy because you can't see the theatrical cuts outside of very special circumstances, but like the point still stands. Those old movies are still there and you can watch them whenever you want. If an author writes a bad book, their old books are still there and you can read them whenever you want.
Yeah, they're extremely permanent, like physical media. You don't even have to go download them somewhere. For the most part, you can literally get a physical piece of media that you can keep in your home. It's why I collect DVDs still. Because I don't have a Blu-ray player, but also like I like to have a physical manifestation of a thing that I love. And no one can take that away from me.
And the difference, perhaps, with theme parks and the changes that they undergo is that they are permanent changes. Changes that cannot be undone easily, often are not undone at all, and that once they're gone, can't be experienced in the same way ever again. And I find that to be fascinating. I mean, if you watch a movie that was released in 1955, that movie is the same in 2019. Happy 2019, by the way. It's the same in 2019 as it ever was. But by contrast, and Alice, you and I were talking about this with Liam, if somebody went to Disneyland in 1955 and then they went back for the first time today, it would be a completely different place, a completely different experience.
It would be almost wholly unrecognizable.
There's almost nothing about Disneyland that is identical to its original opening day.
You might still have some things that would jog a memory. The structure of Main Street, for example, the like layout of the like wheel format of the park. But I mean, like if you went in 1955 and then again today, you would be confronted by entirely new lands like Toontown, entirely new types of rides, entirely new locations of rides. Like the Teacups ride was an opening day attraction, but is now in a completely different part of the park than it was. They just picked it up and moved it. And so you might get the vibe, and you might still find it completely magical, but you would not recognize it.
Yeah, and that's fascinating because no other kind of media is like that. And I think the reaction to change in the parks then becomes a little bit more understandable, where we can say like, hey, when it changes, it's gone, or there is something that is gone. When something replaces something else, that old thing is gone. It's not coming back. And that's something that maybe it seems a little bit like an overreaction. Like, oh no, I'll never be able to ride the Country Bear Jamboree again.
Oh, well, it's still in Florida.
It is still in Florida, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Maybe it feels a bit like an overreaction because you'll never be able to ride something that is now not there anymore. On the other hand, that is kind of tantamount to the destruction of art. It's kind of like rounding up every copy of a movie and destroying it, because that thing can't come back without an immense investment and all sorts of legal things, I assume. That thing is not coming back. And the very personal feelings we have towards theme parks and the way that they change over time can absolutely feel like amplified by that knowledge,
right? Because they didn't just because they can't take away your experience on the ride, just like they can't take away, an original film that you saw. No one can take that from you. However, it does completely remove the opportunity for you to experience it again or to share it with people that you love. It's just gone. You can't take your kids. I can't. I don't know why this is my very first example, but I can't go to Disneyland with my children and have them ride the rocket rods. They're gone. They weren't emotionally important to me, but
they are gone.
But they are gone, and they were a memory that I had that now I can just say, back in my day.
Back in my day, there was a ride here that barely worked.
There was a ride here that barely worked that I got stuck on. One time it broke down. I was single riding alone at 7 years old, and I got
Alice.
It was very traumatizing.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to laugh at your trauma.
Oh no, it's fine. It was hysterical now.
Okay.
It's hysterical now.
It's funny now. Yeah.
But I not that I want to wish that on other people, but now that's my singular experience that cannot be replicated. And I guess that makes it also unique and special, but it also means, that it's just gone. They're not going to put the rocket rods back in there. And if they did, it's not the same ride. They would change part of it. They would make it,
Hopefully they would make it work.
They would make it work, and it would be more stable and less broken, but it's not the same.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think when we think about theme parks, we think about them as permanent places. And this is another thing that's kind of different than other forms of media, where last episode we were talking a little bit about wanting to go see Star Wars Episode 9, whatever the subtitle turns out to be, with people. Right? We want to go and watch it while it's still in theaters. It's this fleeting experience that we're all going to seek out, right?
Right.
And theme parks are kind of like that in that they are fleeting, right? They might change later, so you've got to experience what they have here and now. But on the other hand, they're kind of the complete opposite of that, because there is no theater in the world that will only play Star Wars Episode 9 for 20 years at a time. However, Disneyland will play the same attraction for at least 20 years at a time. I'm sure when they're building something like that, they're thinking about how to do it in the long term. So these are repeatable experiences for a long time, just not indefinitely. And they're also isolated in space, so you can't always access them. But if you are near it, you can go to it. You know what I mean, Alice? It's weird.
It is weird, and it's definitely unique to this experience. I can't think of anything but I mean, can you think of anything but a theme park ride that would invoke this kind of like semi-permanence? Is semi-permanence the like way to put that?
Like it is, like a semi-permanent. Almost. It can last literally a lifetime. When we talk about opening day attractions or attractions that were completed in the 60s, classic attractions like Pirates of the Caribbean or Haunted Mansion, which have been around forever, it seems like. Like, can you imagine a world without the Haunted Mansion? Can you imagine Disneyland without the Haunted Mansion?
I don't want to.
And yet, it could be removed and replaced. It
could be maybe 70 years from now, we reach a point where the Haunted Mansion stops being so iconic and special to people that they go, you know what, like this, we're not getting the same kind of traffic in here as we used to. People just don't seem to really like it anymore. What if we just put in a new thing?
Sure. And that would be, I mean, a valid choice, wouldn't it, Alice? This is the Haunted Mansion running for as long as it has is kind of like a theater that only does one show. And it has done that one show for 40, 50 years. It would be a really weird theater. And yet, I mean,
Chicago's almost done that. In New York.
Is there a theater that's only run in Chicago?
For 21 years
that's
now,
incredible.
I think. 22 years. And that's just this iteration of the show. Like, it ran before that.
Right.
But that's, I mean, it's wild because that theater has become that show. I mean, the set pieces are built into the stage now, and it's not planning on going anywhere. Right. It just keeps running the same the same show and over, 20 something years.
And just like Haunted Mansion, where like some of the effects or set pieces have changed, but the show has overall remained the same. I'm sure that many actors have come and gone in that time. So it's kind of it's kind of that same phenomenon, right? This is the theater where Chicago plays, but I'm sure that the first month that they don't sell out for an entire month, they may think about changing the show. And
maybe it just stays iconic for so long that they just keep going. I mean, if it's still making money, right?
Right. And that's the thing is, wouldn't that kind of transform the space from entertainment space to kind of memorial museum type space?
Ooh, yeah.
Kind of a space not for novelty, not to show people things they haven't seen or something special that they could only see in one place, but rather a place of preservation. And I think that's what, especially with the Disney parks, I think that's what a lot of fans might prefer. A Disney park that maintains a core identity that they identify with, or that they identify with the parks themselves.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, is that necessarily intended ever? Is that something that could work long term as a business strategy? Or, is Disneyland, like Walt Disney infamously said, never going to be finished? And I always kind of read that quote as like a cheeky, haha, we're not quite done with the park yet, please be gentle. But it's also kind of I hope we're always innovating here. And I feel like that's an important aspect of the Disneyland and Disney World ethos, if you could call it that.
Yeah, you've just given me like a good idea, or not a good idea, an interesting thought You've sparked something. I want to run this past you.
Okay.
The theme park, Disney, let's just keep using Disneyland. Disneyland as a museum. Disneyland is an institution now. It is a 60-year long, it's a 60-year-old like space that is, let's call it a museum. And let's call Peter Pan's Flight and Pinocchio's Daring Journey and the Teacups and these like opening day attractions, let's call them like in a museum, you've got your exhibits, right? You've got your standard exhibits. But what if like other rides and other attractions coming in and out are just like traveling exhibits? You can go to the Museum of Natural History and for a few months or, a year or so at a time, you've suddenly got like these new, this is a special exhibit, like a special event that's going to be here for like a while. Come see it. It's going to hang out for quite some time. You have time to come get it, but it's not going to always be here. It will go away at some point, and then you won't get to see it again. If Disney itself is a like an icon or like a piece of history, it can and maybe should have pieces that come in and hang out for a while, but they don't stick because maybe they weren't as iconic, or maybe they were iconic, but they were dated only to this particular moment in history. And if you miss that moment in history, well, then you missed it. Like that's just how it is.
Alice, I am reminded of two things that have happened in Disneyland in the past. But before I start, I want to say, of course, we should acknowledge that Disneyland literally has museums in it.
Oh, yes.
There's the whole front area in front of Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln that is literally a Disneyland museum.
Yes, of course.
And that is its own way of telling its story and of memorializing its past, and of showcasing things that people consider part of the iconography and important history of the parks. So that's separate. I have these two other things that I want to talk about. Alice, in the past, I remember small attractions and shows that coincided with important releases of films or of like popular television shows that were like ongoing.
Are you going to mention the live action Hunchback of Notre Dame show? Because that changed my life and is still the best thing that's ever happened to me. Absolutely
alluding to that. The Feast of Fools, I think it was called.
It was the best.
And it's right there. It's nestled between... now, let me see if I can get this right. It's between Fantasyland and Frontierland, kind of by Big Thunder Mountain. Now yes. That area might be called Big Thunder Ranch, but I think it's kind of being subsumed into Star Wars Galaxy's Edge.
I think it is being eaten by Galaxy's Edge, yes.
Feel the hype?
I'm so hyped.
And the show was huge, right? Now, Alice, I believe I've seen a photo of you in this show.
Yes.
Now, yes, you are a tiny baby at the time.
Yes, I was a very small baby. I was a small child, but they had a part like dance breaks in the show where the dancers would pull little kids from the front couple of rows and hand them tambourines and have them dance around during the Topsy-Turvy song.
So you got to do that.
Oh, of course, every time, and I wouldn't leave Disneyland without doing it.
Oh,
it was my favorite.
That's so cool. I gotta say, I'm kind of glad that Hunchback of Notre Dame had that kind of representation in the parks. And maybe I'm kind of glad that they didn't try to for example, take out Pinocchio's Daring Journey and put in Hunchback of Notre Dame: The Ride. They would call it Quasimodo's Rip-Roarin' Adventure.
I'm sure they wouldn't, but
completely get the tone of the film wrong.
No, absolutely.
And I wonder, like, you know, in some cases, why might that be a better choice? And I think what it really comes down to, Alice, is whether or not that property or that idea can stand the test of time might be up in the air. So a smaller scale temporary production or a smaller attraction makes more sense. And, you know, I kind of miss that at Disneyland. I kind of miss that space for that. And I kind of miss the idea that, like, something's going to show up and it's only going to be here for a little while. And if it works and it stays. But if it only sort of works, it can go. And we don't have to feel bad about that.
Yeah. I'm thinking of another show at California Adventure, the Aladdin musical. Aladdin the musical ran in a theater in California Adventure for years, 10 years. For a really, really, really long time. And it only just in the last couple of years was replaced by the Frozen musical. And these are like little, like 90-minute long mini productions of the Broadway equivalents. But like the Aladdin show probably didn't need to hang on for, 10 years or whatever. They could have replaced it at any time, but it was working and regularly drew huge crowds to see it. So they didn't change it. They kept it. But then when it was time to change it, they swapped it out for something more new and possibly more relevant to the audience they were trying to attract.
Yeah, and I think sometimes Disneyland doesn't get that benefit because of people's expectations of it. And I know we use Disneyland as an example a lot, but when people don't want things to change because they like them as it is, then it kind of puts the park itself in a bind. It wants to change and update and be exciting and new, but at the same time, it feels like it kind of can't. So poor Disneyland gets kind of stuck in a rut where oh man, I'd really like to change out Aladdin now. The film is 20 years old and many people don't want to see the Aladdin musical anymore. Oh no, everybody still loves it. Could be a real problem, especially if you're trying to creatively rework the park to suit some kind of new need. So that's one thing I thought of, is like these temporary exhibition type attractions, right? Mm-hmm. And the other thing I thought of, and Alice, you're gonna have to back me up on this, because I'm sure some of our listeners may not have ever gotten the chance to experience it, but Innoventions is an example of how this concept maybe didn't quite work, actually.
Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. No, you're definitely... I have forgotten about Innoventions. Innoventions was for anybody who doesn't remember or didn't ever get to experience the oddities that were present in Innoventions. It was a large building in the back of Tomorrowland. It used to be something else, didn't it?
It was the Carousel of Progress that then became America Sings.
Innoventions was just like a big empty building where they tried to display like cool new smart home technology, and look at this brand new invention, the Segway. And
I remember you could actually test Segways there.
Test Segways there inside Innoventions. They had arcade games, and they had like new computer models that you could mess with. Like in the late 90s, early 2000s, I feel like the idea was kind of a Epcot like. It was like Disney's answer, or California's answer to like the city of tomorrow, and like, oh, look at how cool the future is.
Yeah, kind of a showcase. A showcase of technology.
Yeah, stuff that they had kind of in Florida for a while, but they instead of. I feel like Florida's version of that is all of Tomorrowland, whereas in California, they restricted it to just like one big weird building with no windows. And
that was a strange part of it. Yes, that it was a big, dark, partially rotating building with no windows. And there are things about Interventions that I love. For example, the production of the character Tom Morrow, who was an audio animatronic that was voiced by Nathan Lane, who you might know as Timon, or as the original Max Bialystock from The Producers.
So good.
He was just a great, fun character who liked the future and was a cool robot. I mean, I liked a lot about him. And I do kind of dig on the atmosphere inside of Interventions. The kind of dark, everything is lit in colorful ways, like cool, different spokes on a wheel sort of nature of the exhibits. There's cool stuff about it. Let's be real, Alice. It's still cool.
We definitely killed a lot of hours inside Interventions.
Yeah.
Because sometimes all of it was, super hot outside and we needed a cool building to run into, or the opposite, it was pouring down rain. Yeah. We would run into this cool building and play a couple of arcade games and then go about our merry way.
Yeah, so I mean, there are cool things about Interventions, but I think Interventions is a flawed concept for a theme park because theme parks have a speed. And this might seem kind of silly, but theme parks move at a certain speed that is unique to theme parks. So sometimes they can do things very quickly, such as reskinning the Tower of Terror at California Adventure. That only took a couple of months, and suddenly it was Guardians of the Galaxy. That was very
Mission,
fast.
breakout, exclamation.
Right. Exclamation point. Other times things take years. Things are built very slowly. But there is a speed, and that speed is limited by things like money, labor hours, and not to mention all of the deals that go into making a theme park attraction happen. And the thing about Interventions was it was meant to have constant new sponsorship. And things were meant to be brought in and swapped out very, very quickly. And that got expensive very, very quickly. And soon, as technology progressed, Interventions became outdated. One of my favorite memories of Interventions, because it was so hilarious, was I got in line and waited the 2 minutes because there was never any line for Interventions.
You just needed to wait for the carousel to come back around to let you on.
It just had to spin back around to an entrance. And we saw a demonstration of Photoshop. And this was like 2008, and anybody could have Photoshop. But this person was like, look, with the wonders of technology, I can change the photo's tint. And
oh my gosh.
I can adjust the hue slider. And I was like, oh no.
Oh no.
Interventions is bad now.
Literally, Photoshop's been a thing since photos were invented. Like,
and this person is sitting at their computer trying to make Photoshop seem cutting edge. Oh. And it was a live actor, like a person who was meant to demonstrate this, every 7 minutes or so. And I walked away in like partial disgust. I was like, oh no.
Oh no.
This is terrible. And then I went upstairs and I realized that I was looking at the same exhibits that had been there for 5-6 years.
And they were all completely outdated.
Yeah, things had moved on and a Segway just wasn't gonna cut it anymore. And when your focus is on change, I feel like that can be almost as disastrous as your focus being on permanence. So I think semi-permanence might kind of be the answer, right? Having this attitude of, we keep what we can, we change what doesn't work as quickly as we can, is a pretty good philosophy.
Yeah, treat it like a museum, that with rotating exhibits and fresh new things for people to see. Because you also want to encourage people to come back, right? You want people to come back over and over and over again. But if it was the exact same, then and every single time you came, your repeat audience goes down. And then people just go, oh, well, you know, I've already rode that ride 150 times. Like, I guess I'll go ride it another time. But it loses some of the novelty and maybe even, some of that like magic of what that Disney strives so hard to cultivate.
Yeah.
Right? Disney is all about magic. And the magic of the wonder of walking into this park, of riding on a ride, not always and not necessarily. I mean, there are certain rides that will remain magical forever. They've hit like the formula and the like cultural hotspot for this ride. But that can't work. It physically cannot work for every ride. You've got to change things occasionally.
Yep. Things must change. And some things, I think, should stay the same. And
keep the Haunted Mansion forever.
Yes, the Haunted Mansion must be immortalized. I wonder if maybe there should be more of a push to preserve certain things about theme parks, maybe even at a separate location, kind of a museum of theme parks, a place that could actually be treated like a museum so that the theme parks could continue to innovate, because part of what makes them so wonderful is the way that they push technology. It is the way that they push entertainment in different and new and interesting, exciting directions.
But wouldn't a museum of theme parks just be another theme park?
Practically. And that's the thing.
Unless it was like, oh, look at this ride vehicle from this old ride, like literally a museum. But if it was like, oh, well, the only place you can still ride the People Mover in California is at the Museum of Disneyland, isn't it just another?
It's Disneyland 2. We built it out in the desert, and it contains
and it's just old rides.
Disneyland rides. So it's actually Disneyland 0 is what we call it, because it's actually before the original Disneyland.
But also, wouldn't that still just be another semi-permanent theme park? You'd constantly be adding to it as Disneyland shut rides down. Even a museum theme park like that wouldn't be a permanent structure. It would always be changing.
Yeah, and we talked about this a little bit with Kevin Perjurer of Defunctland way back in episode 13 when we interviewed him. But this idea that preserving theme park stuff, be it rides, be it attractions, be it even iconography and certain like big structures, is impossible without simply recreating them, or maybe with a scale model. But if you want to preserve the experience, sometimes you just got to rebuild the thing. And Alice, I can't really think of any legitimate examples of a ride that is, complicated and built and had a track and cars and things like that being removed and then re-added to a theme park.
Not off the top of my head, I certainly can't.
We do have one example of an attraction that did make a triumphant return, however.
What was that?
Captain EO.
Oh.
Now,
Captain EO.
Captain EO is such a special attraction because it's an attraction that demanded a special theater be built for it. And then it lived in that theater, and then it left that theater because it's a movie. So the 3D film was changed out for a different 3D film, and some of the effects in the film were changed so that it could become Honey, I Shrunk the Audience. And then it went through several other iterations before eventually just re-becoming Captain EO. And I gotta say, that's an interesting phenomenon. Rides that can kind of be swapped out of each other. Or rather, I guess I should say attractions. Attractions that can kind of be swapped out of each other and just go back to how they were. And I think Captain EO might be the only example of something like that that I've ever seen.
That I personally have ever seen. And it was good. And it was nice to see it come back for a little bit. That was I remember my mom talking about Captain EO. And then it was, but I had just like heard about it and was like, oh, well, that's something I'll never see because they're never going to bring back a Michael Jackson film. And then they did.
Those madmen.
And I got to see it. And that was after Michael Jackson had died. And it was like a tribute, kind of like isn't this nice to have this back for a moment. But even then, I didn't think that was going to stick around and stay permanent. I thought it was just like let's just bring this back as a tribute.
It certainly stuck around longer than I thought it would. It was around for over 4 years when they brought it back. That's a long time.
That is a lot longer than I thought.
For a temporary tribute. And yet, in those 4 years, it never felt stale. And actually, when it left, I felt a little sad. Because there was something about it that was kind of special, even though it was just a movie, a 3D movie made by, the greatest artists of their time. Some of the greatest artists of their time, I should say. It was kind of a special attraction. There was something about it that seemed kind of timeless, and I liked having it back around. And I wonder, Alice, because there are still some rides at Disneyland that have only changed a little. They've changed just a tad. Like Star Tours The Adventures Continue. Or, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. Mission : Breakout !
Thank you.
And there's a chance there for these rides to kind of revert on a special occasion. There's this feeling that maybe they'd go back maybe just a little bit for a little while, for 4 years. And I wonder,
I could see Star Tours going back for like 4 or 5 years,
maybe before it closes forever.
On an anniversary kind of thing, they bring back Captain Rex, for a little bit. I can absolutely see them pulling that off just for like Star Tours. I don't know about a lot of other rides though. There are a lot of rides that they couldn't bring back. I mean, one, because they've taken tracks out, or because they've put like an entirely different structure in its place. I could see something. I could see for Star Tours, but I couldn't see it for Tower of Terror, for example, like Mission Breakout. They changed the whole facade and interior. They changed like everything about that ride. It would not be an easy revert, I don't think. As quickly as it went up, I don't think that they could bring it back as quickly.
I really don't think so. And maybe it wouldn't even be right to do so, because these are changes that were made to maintain the relevance of these attractions. These were changes that were made by creative people who were doing more creative work on top of existing creative work. I know that it feels cheap sometimes to look at an update or at a replacement and say, but remember what used to be here, and wasn't that great too? But at the same time, this is a new artistic expression, and I think it can be just as valid. Maybe even by iterating and by innovating on top of older technologies, in some ways new and more valid than its predecessors.
And I just like had another thought, like it's nice when we get to see new creative works come in and out, and eventually, and maybe those new creative works that come in, and these new artists that get to make new art and give us a fun new experience. Maybe we miss the thing that used to be there for a bit, but like the thing that comes in could possibly end up being your new favorite thing, the thing that you miss when it leaves eventually. And I just started thinking about I mean, we were talking about Star Tours. You know what was in the space that Star Tours was before?
Journeys through inner space.
Adventure through inner space.
What did I say?
journey through.
Oh,
it's okay. It's just I started thinking about Adventure Through Inner Space, and obviously we're not old enough to have ever been on Adventure Through Inner Space, which dates us pretty exact.
Well, we are turning 90 this year, Alice.
Yes, snatch. But my mom talks about Adventure Through Inner Space every once in a while. Like, she'll say, oh, I remember when this used to be Adventure Through Inner Space. I remember how I liked that experience. And I was like, tell me about it. And it was an Omnimover thing. I'll praise the Omnimover. Yeah. And she'll talk about it, but then she'll be like, yeah, but, you know, let's go ride Star Tours. Like, she, as much as she liked it back when it was a thing, the thing that replaced it is something that she also really likes. And she's not even a Star Wars fan, but she likes the simulator ride, and she likes that we like it. You know, every time we go on it with her, she laughs at how we pretend to shoot the blasters and everything. And and it was. It's like, yeah, we lost like kind of a long running icon. I mean, Adventure Through Inner Space ran for 20 whole years. But the thing that replaced it is now our icon. So when it closes, we'll be sad. And like, it's kind of a weird thing to celebrate, that kind of like, oh, well, our parents, you know, mourned the loss of this and we mourn the loss of that. Like it's like a tradition that gets passed down, that we all get to mourn our favorite rides, or, you know, but it's actually kind of special, I think, that we do get that, and that we get to experience that. It's sad, but it's kind of like circle of life, right?
I guess, yeah. And the thing about theme parks is that they are living texts. They're very alive and constantly in flux, because their main stated purpose is to attract people. They are attractions, and new things attract people. And if you can't stay relevant, then you can't do your job as an attraction. You can't continue to attract. Now, I know many attractions that are focused on their history. Alice, we've even been to a few, such as the Mystery Spot, which is focused on both its mystery and its history. But there's something to be said for changing things and updating them and keeping them alive, and giving them new reasons to be visited by people. And I think that's what's so cool about theme parks, is that they can exist as semi-permanent spaces that are a certain way for a certain amount of time. And when they change, sometimes they change. Let me try again. And when they change, sometimes they change drastically and dramatically, and in ways that feel not great at the time. But like you said, it's just another chance for something great to come out of it. So at the end of the day, I think change is a good thing.
I agree.
Well, Alice, it seems like our conversation about the permanent nature of theme parks has come to an end, but the conversation continues.
Yes, the conversation continues on the internet.
What? The internet?
The internet, our favorite place in the world. We are, of course, on Twitter. We're constantly on Twitter, really talking about theme parks and talking about Star Wars and talking about Galaxy's Edge specifically, just all the time, which is a combination of our favorite things of theme parks and Star Wars.
The news coming out of Galaxy's Edge has been so incredible lately, and I've got all the updates for you on my Twitter page. I am at Buddy_Duquesne. Duquesne is spelled Duquesne.
And I am at Alice White THP, both on Twitter and on Instagram.
Alice, we got a couple of important Twitter shout outs for this episode specifically. So, like we said at the beginning of the episode, we got to talk about this episode before we made it with a couple of our good friends on Discord. The first of whom, of course, is TH Ponders. He's at TH Ponders on Twitter. And he's the host of Accession, which is a podcast about museums and art and the experience of those things. Really amazing podcast. I highly recommend everybody go listen to it. He also co-hosts Rogue Fun, a podcast story with you, Alice, doesn't he?
Oh, that's right. He does. He is my co-host on Rogue Fun. We talk about Rogue One, a Star Wars story every month. We are recording January's episode this week, so keep your eyes open.
We also got to talk to our friend on the Discord, Liam, who is at Liam Belson, LiamBelson on Twitter. And he gave us some of the insights that we had on the way that theme park experiences are personal, and that by changing over time, it can make a personal experience more personal, because if you go in a certain time and place, then that's yours. And if it changes, then it makes it even more yours. So thank you for that insight, Liam. That's really good stuff.
It was super nice to talk to these guys on Discord. And the reason why we were able to do that, the reason why we set that Discord chat up kind of very last minute, is that we wanted a chance to experiment with one of our cool new Patreon rewards.
Oh man, Alice, do we get to talk about our Patreon awards now?
I think it's time to talk about our Patreon awards.
Guys, I am so excited that we are doing this Patreon. As you might know, podcasting for us is kind of a hobby, but it's kind of an expensive one that requires hosting fees and new equipment and going to theme parks and other themed attractions, which can pile up the expenses. So we're hoping to cover some of that through the Patreon, and we've got some great rewards for you guys if you back us, such as bonus minisodes every month at the $2 level.
Yeah, the $2 level is it's our we've named our the levels after the old ticketing system at Disneyland. So we have A, B, C, D, and E ticket levels. The A ticket level is $2 per month. That's our lowest tier. At $2 a month, you get your name on the supporters page on our website and immediately, automatically access to all monthly bonus mini episodes. So every month we'll be putting up one or more tiny little episodes, usually on topics that are too specific, maybe, or too small to be their own full episodes. So they'll be, 5 to 10 minutes long, quick little chats, conversations about theme parks and all of the stuff you love from us, but in miniature form. And you get that right away. For, the lowest tier. We're not going to make you pay too much to get access to that content.
No, we really want to be able to share that stuff with as many people as possible. Alice, I am super excited for some of the other reward tiers. We shouldn't read them all out here, but at higher tiers, our patrons can expect special Discord privileges. They can get postcards and stickers, personalized, signed by us, sent to them. They can get welcomed to monthly watch parties of movies based on attractions, or maybe even just attraction ride-through videos. And we'll all watch them together and chat while we watch them. And at the very highest level, at the e-ticket level, we will welcome our patrons to help us produce the podcast by having a similar chat like we had with Ponders and Liam about, what we want to record about. They can pitch us ideas and give us feedback as we prepare for each new episode. I'm really excited for that tier. I hope we can get a couple of friends to share that stuff with us. So I can't wait.
Yeah, I think you guys are really going to like it. We had a really good chat with Ponders and Liam, and we had a couple of people barely miss it. They barely missed being able to chat with us, and I know that they would have had some really great input to this conversation also, because we love talking to our friends, and we love talking to our listeners, and we love to hear from you, and we want to share our experience making the podcast with you. And in order to do that, though, yes, we do have to start this Patreon because we've got stuff to pay for. And if you like it and you want to help us out, we really, really, really appreciate it. But just as much helping us out with your monetary contribution is also you and your word of mouth. We sharing the episode with your friends, telling people about it, tweeting about it, tagging us in your tweets so we can retweet you. All of those things really, really do an awesome job of helping us keep this show up and running. And for those of you who already do that, we love and appreciate you so much.
Yeah, because without you, there is no podcast. So to each and every one of you listening, we really do appreciate you guys even being here to hear these words. Thank you so much for listening. Alice, did you know that right now our listeners are probably hearing our theme music?
Our theme music is Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers featuring Phil Alvin.
Yes, it is by those people featuring that person. And did you know that they could find the Feetwarmers and all of their music at www.californiafeetwarmers.com?
I did. Also, did you know that you put in additional music into this episode?
I am acutely aware of the additional music that I added to this episode, and it was all by Kevin MacLeod, who you can find the music of at incomptech.com. Kevin is a prolific composer of many tracks that you've no doubt heard all over the internet, and he lets us use them royalty-free as long as we credit him, so this is that credit. Thank you so much, Kevin MacLeod.
Thank you, Kevin MacLeod, and thank you, listeners. We appreciate you and love you, and we hope to see you all over the internet and on our Patreon.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you return to those happy places.